One careless moment, one glance caught on CCTV, and my life changed forever. A ruthless CEO, a shocking proposition, office secrets, blackmail, and a love that could either save or destroy us. If you like this story, then press like button and tell in comments where from you watching. For more emotional and romantic love stories, press subscribe button. Thanks. The office was unusually quiet that afternoon. The usual hum of keyboards, murmurs of colleagues, and distant ringing of phones felt muted, as though the building itself were holding its breath. Fluorescent lights flickered softly overhead, casting a sterile glow across polished desks and scattered reports. I was juggling spreadsheets, emails, and a looming client presentation when disaster struck. My dress strap snapped. The faint rip echoed in my ears louder than it could possibly have. My cheeks burned. My stomach twisted into knots. I froze, eyes darting around the office. Thankfully, or so I thought, no one seemed to notice. But I knew better. People noticed everything, and I had no time to wait for discretion. I rushed to the nearest restroom, cursing my luck under my breath. Each step felt like thunder, every heartbeat like a drum warning of the coming storm. Inside, I fumbled with my drawer, pulling out a spare outfit I kept, just in case. My hands shook. The mirror reflected my anxious eyes, wide and desperate, the slightest tremor betraying the calm I tried to maintain. I didn't notice the security camera outside the door. Its red light blinked silently, recording every frantic movement, every hurried adjustment, every panicked breath. Oblivious, I changed clothes, hugging the fabric around me as if it could shield me from embarrassment or fate itself. Minutes later, my phone buzzed sharply in my pocket. A text from the assistant made my chest constrict. CEO wants to see you in his office. Immediately. Immediately. The word reverberated in my mind like a bell. My heart pounded. My breath caught. What could I have done? A misfiled report? An overlooked email? Or worse? I walked to the elevator, trying to steady my shaking hands, my racing thoughts. Each tile in the hallway seemed to stretch beneath me, the fluorescent lights casting long, cold shadows. My reflection in the glass doors appeared smaller, fragile, trapped in the weight of expectation. When I entered ArmaanRiaz's office, the atmosphere shifted. His gaze landed on me like a blade, sharp and assessing. He didn't rise, didn't smile. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound between us. I saw everything on CCTV, he said softly. The words hit like ice. My throat went dry. I didn't mean to, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. He cut me off, calm and unnervingly commanding. I know. But it doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is what will happen next. Time slowed. The office, the hum, the world beyond those walls, all disappeared. His calm was more terrifying than anger. My mind scrambled. Punishment? Termination? Humiliation? Instead of wrath, he smirked faintly, a shadow of amusement flickering in his eyes. My stomach twisted. That smirk wasn't casual, it was deliberate, magnetic, and somehow dangerous. You have a choice, he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping into a near whisper, intimate yet commanding. Accept my terms, or face consequences. Electricity surged through me, fear and disbelief colliding with something unnameable. His words weren't a threat. They were a challenge, a puzzle, a dangerous game I hadn't agreed to play, but was already trapped in. I tried to speak, to protest, to explain that I was just an employee, not a pawn in some twisted narrative. But my voice failed. I could only stare, heart hammering, frozen by the weight of his presence. The tension in the room was suffocating. Every subtle tilt of his head, every quiet inhale, every shadow that danced across his sharp jawline seemed charged. He was untouchable, untethered, yet for a fleeting second, that smirk hinted at vulnerability. Something human behind the ruthless CEO. I tried to reason with myself. There was no rational explanation. Nothing made sense. Yet some irrational thread whispered that the choice he offered would bind me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Fear and curiosity twisted together, dizzying and irresistible. My eyes flicked to the corner of the room, where the CCTV monitor sat silently, a witness to my humiliation. Every frantic motion, every slip of composure, every heartbeat I wished had gone unnoticed was there, frozen in time. And yet it hadn't brought judgment, it had brought leverage. A lever that could shift the very course of my life. I don't understand, I whispered, trembling. What do you mean by your terms? He leaned back again, fingers drumming lightly against the desk. Understanding will come with time, he said, almost like a promise. For now, all you need to know is that nothing will ever be the same. A shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to retreat, to find safety in reports and emails. But the gravity of the moment held me in place. The office, once mundane, had become a stage for a drama I hadn't known I was part of. Outside, wind rattled the windows, carrying hints of a storm. It mirrored the turbulence inside me. My life, once orderly, had fractured in a single, careless act. A wardrobe malfunction. A glance caught on camera. A proposition whispered. I swallowed hard, heart racing. One glance at Armaan, seated there like both predator and king, and I realized the magnitude of what had begun. Reality had shifted. Rules had changed. I had a choice that would define my future, for better or worse. As I left the office, hands trembling, the weight of his words pressing down, I felt the first taste of the storm to come. A storm of secrecy, blackmail, fear, and, impossibly, something else, a pull toward the man whose smirk haunted my thoughts, even as I fled. And deep inside, I couldn't shake the thought that, in this twisted game, he had already won. Because I wasn't just afraid of losing my job anymore. I was afraid of losing myself. Armaan leaned back in his chair, unhurried, as sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. The glass walls of his office reflected the city like a painting, sharp lines, cold blues, distant movement, everything controlled, everything untouchable. His calm, almost playful smile made my heart pound harder than any raised voice could have. I stood there, on the other side of the polished wooden desk, struggling to remember how to breathe. You have a choice, he said slowly, deliberately, as if savoring every syllable. Ignore what happened, and it could ruin your career, or accept my terms, and your mistake disappears. The word choice echoed in my mind, hollow and misleading. My fingers curled into my palms. Terms. That single word carried weight, menace, mystery. My thoughts spiraled wildly, grasping for logic in a moment that had already slipped beyond it. Terms? I whispered. My voice barely reached him, trembling like it might shatter midair. You want me to do what? For a fraction of a second, the office was silent. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to pause, as if the room itself leaned closer to listen. Marry me, Armaan said. Just like that. No build-up. No hesitation. As if he had asked me to pass a file or schedule a meeting. Shock slammed into me, freezing my limbs, stealing the air from my lungs. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. The world tilted, the edges blurring. You're joking, I finally managed, a weak laugh escaping despite myself. It sounded foreign, brittle. I never joke, he replied softly. his eyes didn't waver. They were steady, dark, unreadable eyes that had silenced entire boardrooms, eyes people feared meeting for too long. Now they were fixed on me, unblinking, waiting. "I don't care if it's sudden, unusual, or scandalous," he continued, his tone infuriatingly calm. "The decision is yours. But think carefully. Refuse, and I guarantee your career here ends. Accept, and everything remains the same, except you and I become legally bound." Legally bound. The words wrapped around my chest like a tightening chain. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. This wasn't a proposal. It wasn't romance. It was a contract written in fear and imbalance, disguised as an option. And yet, standing there, I hated myself for noticing the way his voice softened at the end, or the faint crease between his brows, as if this decision cost him something too. Marry him. The ruthless CEO. The man whose name alone could make people straighten their backs and lower their voices. The man I had admired from a distance, feared up close, and never once imagined in my personal life. My knees felt weak. I steadied myself against the edge of the desk, the cool wood grounding me. "This is insane," I whispered. "You can't just, people will talk. The board, the media." "Let them," he interrupted. "I handle consequences for a living." His confidence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It settled into the room like certainty, immovable and suffocating. I glanced around the office, suddenly aware of how small I was within it. The abstract painting on the wall, harsh strokes of black and gold, looked different now. Less like art. More like a warning. "What, why me?" I asked finally. The question slipped out before I could stop it, raw and unguarded. "There are hundreds of women. Powerful ones. Women who would agree without hesitation." For the first time, something shifted. Armaan leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk. The distance between us shrank, and with it came an unexpected intimacy. His voice dropped, lower now, quieter. "Because I've seen enough mistakes to know when they're worth keeping," he said. "And you intrigue me." Intrigue. That single word sent a strange flutter through my chest, unwelcome and confusing. I hated that it affected me at all. Hated that my heart reacted before my mind could catch up. I searched his face for cruelty, for mockery, but found neither. Only curiosity. And beneath it, something dangerously close to loneliness. This wasn't how love stories began. There were no flowers, no soft confessions, no warmth. Just power, leverage, and a line I was being asked to cross without knowing what waited on the other side. "I need time," I said quickly. "I can't decide something like this now." "You don't have time," he replied gently, and that was the cruelest part. The footage exists. So does gossip. All it takes is one report. The unspoken threat hung heavy between us. I thought of my parents, proud of the job I had fought so hard to keep. I thought of the years I had spent building my career, the late nights, the sacrifices. One careless moment, one snapped strap, and it all stood on the edge of collapse. Outside, clouds drifted across the sky, dimming the sunlight. The room darkened just a little, as if the day itself shared my hesitation. I imagined myself walking out, refusing, choosing dignity over fear. But I also imagined the aftermath, the whispers, the HR meeting, the polite termination letter that would follow me forever. Armaan watched me quietly, giving me space and none at all. He didn't rush me. He didn't reassure me. He simply waited, confident that time was on his side. "Is this permanent?" I asked, my voice cracking. "This marriage?" His gaze softened, only slightly. "For now," he said. Everything else can be discussed later. Later. Another vague promise. Another door left intentionally ajar. I looked down at my hands, at the faint tremble I could no longer hide. Somewhere in the silence, I realized my heart wasn't just afraid. It was curious. And that frightened me more than his threat ever could. Because some part of me wondered what kind of man would offer marriage instead of destruction. What kind of secret lay behind his composed exterior. And whether agreeing would destroy me, or change me into someone I no longer recognized. "I'll give you tonight," he said at last. "Decide by tomorrow morning. A deadline. Clean. Final." I nodded numbly and turned toward the door. My legs felt unsteady, like I was walking out of a dream I hadn't chosen. Just before I reached the handle, his voice stopped me. "This never leaves this room," he said. "No matter what you choose." I didn't look back. I couldn't. As I stepped into the hallway, the office lights flickered back to life, too bright, too normal. People passed by, laughing softly, unaware that my entire future had just been rewritten behind glass walls and closed doors. By the time I reached my desk, the sky outside had darkened completely. Rain tapped against the windows, slow and persistent, like a question with no easy answer. That night, lying awake, his words replayed in my mind over and over. "Marry me." And I knew, whatever I chose in the morning, there would be no turning back. The office felt unusually heavy that morning, as if the walls themselves pressed down on me. Fluorescent lights flickered above, their hum echoing the racing of my heart. I sat across from Armaan, trying to process the audacious proposition that had turned my life upside down. Marriage. Blackmail. One small wardrobe mistake had thrown me into a drama I couldn't escape, and every rational thought screamed at me to run. "You have until Friday to decide," he said calmly, measured, deliberate. "In the meantime, act normal. No one must know, and nothing must change in the office. We continue as if nothing happened." The word normal felt like a cruel joke. Pretend everything is ordinary while my world teetered on the edge of chaos. My fingers curled into my palms. Every instinct urged me to refuse, to reclaim control, but fear gripped me, the fear of losing my job, the fear of exposure, and, inexplicably, the strange pull I felt toward him. I left his office in a daze, hands trembling slightly as I passed rows of desks. My eyes caught the CCTV monitor in the hallway, black, unblinking, omnipresent. Every corner of the office, every conversation, every small mistake, he could see it all. Panic and a peculiar, almost intimate vulnerability wrapped around me. I was completely exposed. The days that followed blurred into a haze of routine, tension, and silent observation. Armaan maintained his commanding presence, sharp, meticulous, untouchable, but subtle shifts did not escape me. Occasionally, he would appear at my desk with a brief, controlled smile, handing me coffee, or offering advice that was practical yet intimate in a way I couldn't explain. One morning, his fingers brushed mine while passing a report. The faint warmth lingered, betraying the calm I struggled to maintain. Colleagues whispered, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. I avoided eye contact, focused on my work, but the image of him, leaning back in his chair, steepled fingers, eyes sharp and calculating, haunted me. Each passing glance, each subtle gesture, made the air charged, electric, impossible to ignore. Midweek, I realized fear wasn't the only emotion tethered to him. A magnetic pull, darker and more compelling, had taken root. I recoiled at the thought. How could I feel attraction toward a man capable of destroying me with a single word? And yet, every brief smile, every calculated look, drew me further in. The tension became unbearable, a knot in my chest I couldn't untangle. Thursday arrived, grey and oppressive, the sky heavy with clouds. The office felt stifling, even as my colleagues carried on, unaware of the quiet storm between us. I glanced at him across the room, back straight, fingers tapping lightly on his desk, voice calm yet commanding. He was a predator wrapped in precision, untouchable and immaculate, yet each subtle acknowledgement of my presence felt intimate, almost predatory. I returned to my desk, trying to focus on mundane tasks. My reflection in the monitor glass betrayed my tension, hair disheveled, pale cheeks, eyes wide, heartbeat visible even in stillness. And beneath it all, an uneasy curiosity. I hated that I felt it, hated that part of me was drawn to him. That night, I replayed every interaction, every whispered threat, every fleeting gesture. I imagined standing before him, making a choice that could reshape my entire life. Rejection meant humiliation and whispered gossip, acceptance meant surrender and uncertainty. Both outcomes terrified me equally. Friday loomed like a storm on the horizon. Every task, every email, every casual office conversation felt loaded, a reminder of the decision that waited. I glimpsed him once more, Armaan, seated like a king surveying his domain, fingers steepled, eyes unyielding. The distance between us was both vast and intimate, a chasm I could neither bridge nor avoid. I thought of my parents, proud of the career I had clawed to build. I thought of colleagues whose respect I had earned through relentless effort. And then I thought of Armaan, his gaze, his controlled gestures, his quiet dominance. I realized, with a shiver, that no matter my choice, my life as I knew it would end. The office itself seemed to press in, suffocating. Every sound, keyboard clicks, hum of the lights, whispered conversations, felt amplified, intrusive, a reminder that I was being watched. The thought of him seeing every nervous tick, every faltering step, was terrifying. And yet, the intimacy of that surveillance, the knowledge that he was present even when unseen, unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. By afternoon, I understood that fear was no longer my dominant emotion. Desire, complicated, unbidden, and dangerously magnetic, had rooted itself deep inside me. Every glance, every subtle acknowledgement from him intensified it. The awareness of him, of his presence, consumed me. Hours stretched painfully into late afternoon. Rain began tapping against the windows, first softly, then with insistent rhythm. The sound mirrored my pulse, relentless and urgent. I imagined the choice before me, refusal and ruin, acceptance and uncertainty, and my mind spun in spirals, caught between instinct, obligation, fear, and fascination. Finally, as the office emptied, I lingered at my desk, staring out at the storm. The sky had darkened, streaked with silver and grey clouds moving like slow, restless ghosts. My reflection in the glass seemed almost a stranger, tense, wary, pulled in a direction I couldn't resist or comprehend. My phone buzzed quietly. A message. Decide wisely. I'll see you in the morning. The words were brief, controlled, precise. They carried inevitability. My chest tightened, the tension in my body coiling further. Sleep would not come easily, and if it did, it would be haunted by his presence, his gaze, and the dangerous power he wielded. Marry him. Refuse him. Expose him. Protect myself. Risk everything. Each possibility flashed through my mind, none offering clarity, none offering comfort. Deep inside, I realized the terrifying truth: this choice wasn't merely about marriage, career, or blackmail. It was about surrender, surrender to fear, to desire, to a man who could destroy or transform my life in a single instant. The rain tapped harder against the windows, a relentless rhythm echoing the chaos in my mind. I pressed my palms against the desk, gripping it as if it could anchor me. My reflection stared back, wide-eyed, uncertain, caught between instinct and logic, fear and something darker, something I dared not name. Armaan's words, simple yet heavy, replayed in my mind over and over: decide wisely. Tomorrow, the deadline would arrive. And with it, the reckoning I could no longer avoid. For the first time, I understood that whatever I chose, there would be no turning back. My life, my career, my very self, teetered on the edge. And in the quiet between the storm and the office hum, I felt it, the pull, dangerous and undeniable, of a man who could ruin me, or consume me entirely. The office felt different that morning. The usual hum of keyboards and distant chatter seemed distant, almost muted, as though the building itself was holding its breath in anticipation. Rain streaked the windows outside, grey clouds sliding across the sky, mirroring the turmoil that churned inside me. Every instinct told me to avoid him, to retreat into my work, to hide from the man whose gaze had become impossible to ignore. Yet, each step toward my desk felt heavier than the last, weighted by the knowledge that today was the day I had to decide. Armaan had arrived early, as always. I saw him across the office, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette framed by the grey light of the storm outside. The rain painted streaks across the glass, and for a moment, he looked less like the ruthless CEO and more like a figure out of a painting, still, composed, yet somehow human. My chest tightened as our eyes met briefly, a spark of recognition, and something unspoken, passing between us. I forced myself to focus on the spreadsheet open on my monitor, my fingers tapping keys mechanically. But my mind refused to obey. I replayed every moment from the past week, the subtle touches, the fleeting smiles, the way he appeared beside my desk with coffee as if my exhaustion were his concern. Each memory was a jolt, a reminder of the magnetic pull that terrified me more than the thought of losing my career. The morning dragged on. Colleagues whispered and passed by, oblivious to the quiet tension that hung in the air like smoke. I avoided eye contact, yet I felt his presence everywhere, an invisible thread linking us across the polished office floor. Every glance from him, even from a distance, made the air charged, electric. I hated myself for noticing. And yet, I could not help it. Around midday, he appeared at my desk. Coffee in one hand, his other hand brushing briefly against mine as he placed the cup down. The warmth lingered on my skin long after he walked away. I tried to focus on the report in front of me, but the words blurred, the numbers meaningless. I was aware of nothing but the way he had looked at me, a steady, measured gaze that seemed to penetrate more than my outward composure. "You'll have to decide soon," his voice had said the previous evening in a text, simple and controlled, yet heavier than any threat. Now, I felt it hanging between us in the quiet of the office, invisible but undeniable. Every second stretched taut, filled with anticipation, dread, and an emotion I wasn't ready to name. By the afternoon, the rain outside had grown heavier, tapping persistently against the windows. I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the droplets racing each other down the glass. Each one seemed like a countdown, each streak a reminder that time was slipping, and with it, my chance to make the choice that would define everything. Armaan appeared at my side without warning, leaning slightly over the partition of my desk. "You seem distracted," he said quietly, voice smooth and measured. "Do you want to take a break?" I shook my head, my throat dry. "I can't," I murmured. Every instinct screamed that even talking to him, even hearing his voice, made me lose control. And yet, there was a pull I couldn't deny, a gravity that pulled me toward him even as my mind screamed to run. He didn't insist. He just lingered for a moment, his presence close enough to make the air between us electric, then stepped back, disappearing down the hall with the same quiet authority that had become so familiar, and so dangerous. The rest of the day passed in a blur of reports, emails, and stolen glances across the office. Each interaction, no matter how mundane, was charged with an unspoken tension. I could feel him watching me, even when he wasn't near. Every movement I made seemed magnified, scrutinized, and impossible to escape. As the clock approached evening, the office emptied gradually. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, a quiet backdrop to the storm raging in my chest. I gathered my belongings slowly, my mind racing, replaying the past week, weighing every possible outcome. Refuse him, and I would lose everything I had worked for. Accept, and I would step into a life I could not imagine, bound to a man I did not fully understand. The hallway was empty as I made my way to the elevator. The faint hum of the lights and the soft patter of rain were the only sounds accompanying me. That's when I noticed the CCTV monitor blinking in the corner, black and unblinking. Every step I took, every breath I drew, every tiny hesitation, it was all recorded. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I was completely exposed. And yet, the idea that he could see me, that he knew even the smallest tremor in my composure, stirred something else. A thrill, subtle but undeniable, that made my pulse race. I hated myself for it, and yet I couldn't shake it. Later, in the quiet of my apartment, I replayed the week in my mind. Each interaction, each subtle touch, each fleeting glance, they had been building toward this day, and now the choice was unavoidable. The rain outside mirrored my thoughts, relentless and unending, a rhythm that echoed the turmoil in my chest. I thought of him, leaning back in his chair, steepled fingers, eyes sharp and unyielding. That same calm confidence that had terrified me now felt like a magnet, drawing me in against my better judgment. How could one man hold such power over fear, desire, and obsession all at once? And yet, he did. I imagined standing before him in the office tomorrow morning. The room would be silent, the city sprawling behind him through glass walls, and I would have to make a choice that could destroy or redefine everything. Refusal meant humiliation, whispers, the collapse of my carefully built career. Acceptance meant surrender, an unknown, uncharted path with him, a man whose gaze had already unraveled me in ways I could not admit. Sleep came reluctantly that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, eyes tracing the shadows that moved across the walls in the dim light. My heart refused to settle. Every instinct urged me to flee, to protect myself, yet every thought of him drew me closer, made me ache with a longing I wasn't ready to face. The rain continued, steady and insistent, a backdrop to the storm that had taken residence in my chest. Each drop was a reminder that the choice was inevitable. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside me, relentless, chaotic, and yet beautiful in its own merciless way. And deep inside, I understood something terrifying. This choice wasn't simply about career or reputation. It was about surrender, surrender to fear, desire, and a man who could destroy or consume me in a single moment. Whatever I chose in the morning, there would be no turning back. Friday morning arrived like a storm waiting to break. The office was quieter than usual, the hum of computers and faint chatter of colleagues muted by the weight pressing on my chest. Outside, the sky was heavy, clouds sliding slowly across the skyline, grey and oppressive, mirroring the storm inside me. Every instinct screamed to avoid him, to hide behind spreadsheets and emails, to escape the choice I had been running from all week. Yet, every step toward Armaan's office felt unavoidable, as if gravity itself had claimed me. I entered his office, and for a moment, the world seemed to tilt. Sunlight filtered through the glass walls, pale and weak against the grey sky, reflecting off the polished surfaces. Armaan looked up from his papers, calm and composed as always, but today his gaze carried a different weight, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps impatience. My chest tightened. Every muscle in my body seemed to betray me, trembling not from fear alone, but from a pull I could not name. "You're late," he said softly, leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled. There was no reprimand in his tone, only a quiet, controlled authority that made the air between us taut. "I was thinking," I whispered, my voice shaking, almost swallowed by the silence. He studied me steadily, and I felt that gaze pierce through every layer of composure I had tried to maintain. It was as if he could see every hesitation, every pulse of fear, every tiny flicker of desire I refused to acknowledge. "You've thought enough," he said finally. "Now it's time to act." My heart hammered in my chest. This was the moment I had dreaded, anticipated, and feared in equal measure. I took a tentative step forward, knees weak, hands trembling. Refusal was unthinkable, the thought of facing him and the fallout of my career too heavy. "I accept," I breathed, my words trembling, foreign on my lips, yet heavy with inevitability. For a heartbeat, the office was silent. Time seemed suspended. Armaan's eyes darkened, a flicker of satisfaction and something deeper crossing his face, something I couldn't name, yet felt in every fiber of my body. "Wise choice," he murmured. His voice wasn't boastful, not cruel, just precise, almost intimate, and I shivered. He rose from his chair slowly, each movement deliberate, commanding, yet gentle. The space between us contracted, charged with a tension that made the air almost electric. I wanted to step back, to remind myself that this was a legal arrangement, a contract born of blackmail. But I couldn't. Something in his presence, his control, the faint vulnerability behind his mask, the calm certainty, kept me rooted in place. He closed the distance between us by a single step, and suddenly the warmth of his proximity was overwhelming. I could smell him faintly, the subtle scent of his cologne intoxicating, and my breath caught. The closeness was terrifying, yet undeniable, a pull I had no intention of resisting. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked softly, low, near enough that the vibration of his words brushed against my ear. His gaze searched mine, as if measuring whether my heart would betray me before my words did. "I think so," I whispered, though the truth was I didn't fully understand. I only knew that I was standing here, willingly, on the edge of something I could not control. A faint smile curved his lips, subtle and unsettling. "Good," he murmured. "Because from this moment on, nothing will be the same." The silence stretched, thick and intimate. I felt every heartbeat, every shallow breath, every trembling in my hands. Then, almost casually, he reached out, his hand brushing lightly against my shoulder. The touch was brief, seemingly innocent, yet it jolted through me, leaving a trail of warmth I couldn't ignore. I wanted to pull away, to remind myself that this was a contract, not a romance. But I didn't. The faint spark of connection, the pull of danger and desire, rooted me to the spot. "Come closer," he whispered. The word was a command, soft but absolute, and I felt my legs move of their own accord, drawing me closer until barely a foot separated us. His hand shifted, tracing lightly down my arm, subtle yet incendiary. I swallowed hard, my pulse thrumming like a drum in my ears. The office, the city, the polished glass walls, they all faded. There was only him, only this moment, suspended in a fragile tension between fear and longing. "Do you trust me?" he asked, voice low, intimate. The question sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized I wanted to answer honestly, even if I didn't fully understand what trust meant in this context. "I think so," I whispered. My words were barely audible, but they carried the weight of my surrender, however tentative it might be. His eyes softened, just for a fleeting moment, and I felt my chest tighten. The calm authority I had feared now carried an almost human vulnerability, something I hadn't expected and couldn't decipher. My heartbeat betrayed me, loud and fast, as I tried to steady my racing thoughts. He tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk curving his lips. For a heartbeat, he studied me, and I wondered what he saw: the fear, the hesitation, the curiosity, the vulnerability I could not hide. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped back, giving me space. Yet the intensity of the moment lingered, invisible but potent, a thread connecting us even across the small distance. "Today is only the beginning," he said quietly. "There will be rules, expectations, boundaries, but for now, you've made the choice." I nodded, unable to speak. The words I wanted to say, the ones screaming inside my chest, stayed lodged in my throat. My mind was a storm of fear, confusion, and a dangerous, undeniable longing. He returned to his desk with his usual calm precision, yet I was acutely aware of every inch of him: posture, presence, the faint tension in his shoulders. My pulse betrayed me, and I forced myself to look away, focusing instead on the rain-soaked city beyond the windows. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Colleagues moved about as usual, oblivious to the quiet storm between us. But I could feel it in every glance, every sound, every movement around me. The choice had been made, yet its weight pressed down on me unbearably. By lunch, I found myself alone in the office kitchen, staring at my reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator. Pale, tense, eyes wide and uncertain. I pressed a hand to the cool metal, trying to steady my trembling hands, trying to slow my racing heart. And then, I realized something terrifying: fear was no longer my dominant emotion. Something else, exhilaration, anticipation, something darker, had taken root. The pull toward him, the thrill of proximity, the dangerous intimacy of the morning's encounter, it had entwined itself in a way I could not ignore. The afternoon sun, weak and diffused through the grey clouds, cast long shadows across the office. I glanced toward Armaan. He was seated at his desk, fingers steepled, eyes unwavering. The calm authority, the quiet dominance, the faint flicker of something human beneath it, it drew me in irresistibly. I realized then that this was only the beginning. The choice had been made, but the consequences, the tension, the pull between us, it was far from over. I shivered, aware that every interaction from this moment onward would be charged with desire, fear, and the dangerous intimacy that had now begun to define us. Even as I returned to my desk, the storm within me raged on, echoing the muted chaos outside. The choice had been made, yet its meaning was still unfolding. Monday arrived like a quiet storm. The city outside was draped in grey light, clouds heavy with the memory of Friday's rain. The office felt different somehow, as if the walls themselves were aware of the decision I had made and now watched me in silent anticipation. The hum of computers and low chatter of colleagues was no longer ordinary, it was amplified, charged with a tension that wrapped around me like a second skin. Every glance, every movement carried weight, because now I was bound to Armaan in a way I could not undo. I arrived early, attempting to steady my nerves. The thought of facing him again made my stomach tighten, my pulse thrum like a wild drum. The choice had been made, but the reality of it had yet to settle. What would he expect? How would this arrangement, this marriage born from blackmail, actually manifest in day-to-day life? The uncertainty was suffocating. Armaan appeared in his office just as I reached my desk. He moved with the same measured precision that had captivated and terrified me from the beginning. His suit pressed sharply against his frame, his gaze unwavering as it swept over the office floor before finally landing on me. Even at a distance, the pull of his presence was magnetic, dangerous, impossible to ignore. He didn't call me over, didn't issue a word of instruction. He simply observed, the corner of his mouth hinting at a smile that was calm, controlled, and yet somehow intimate. I felt my pulse accelerate as I lowered my eyes, pretending to focus on the monitor before me. but I could feel him, the invisible thread of his attention threading through the air, wrapping itself around me. Around mid-morning, he appeared at my desk. This time, it wasn't a fleeting brush of hands or casual gesture. He leaned slightly over my workspace, his gaze following every movement of mine with deliberate intent. The scent of his cologne reached me again, subtle but intoxicating, and I realized that my chest was tight, my palms damp, my thoughts scattered. I tried to type, to force attention to the spreadsheets and reports before me, but the words blurred. All I could focus on was him, standing so close I could feel the faint warmth radiating off his body. "Have you adjusted to everything?" he asked quietly, voice low and smooth, carrying the same authority that had made me tremble before. I swallowed, forcing my voice to steady. "I think so," I whispered. Truthfully, I wasn't sure what I had adjusted to. I was standing in an office, bound by a legal agreement, yet every instinct screamed that my life had shifted into an entirely new orbit, one dictated by him, by his presence, by the tension that existed between us. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he lingered, just close enough that the space between us felt charged, electric. I could feel my pulse in my ears, the rapid beat betraying me with every moment he remained near. And then, almost imperceptibly, he reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. The touch was subtle, gentle, but it ignited a spark that raced through my body, leaving me unsteady. I wanted to step back, to remind myself of reason, of rational boundaries, of the cold logic of the arrangement. But my feet refused to move. The warmth of him, the closeness, the deliberate intimacy of that small gesture, my body had betrayed me before my mind could protest. "Do you understand why this tension exists?" he asked, his voice lower now, softer, carrying a thread of curiosity. The question, innocent on the surface, made my heart hammer and cheeks burn. I shook my head slightly, unable to form words. He tilted his head, studying me with the same intensity that had both terrified and fascinated me since the first day. "You do," he said finally, almost to himself, a faint smirk brushing the corner of his lips. "You're just afraid to admit it." My throat tightened. Was it fear? Desire? Or a mix of both that I had yet to disentangle? I couldn't tell. What I could feel, though, was the undeniable pull, the magnetic, dangerous closeness that seemed to expand with every passing second. The rest of the morning passed in a haze. My colleagues moved about as usual, oblivious to the charged atmosphere. But I could feel every glance he threw, every casual movement, every step he took through the office as if it were a carefully calculated dance meant solely for me. The subtle tension between us wrapped itself around my mind like fog, inescapable, consuming, intoxicating. By lunch, the office had emptied slightly, leaving a few scattered employees murmuring quietly in the distance. I poured myself a cup of coffee, hands trembling slightly, aware that he was now standing a few feet away, leaning casually against a desk, watching me with that familiar, calm intensity. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore him, to maintain professional distance, to preserve what remained of my rational mind. Yet as our eyes met across the room, the air seemed to crackle. Something unspoken passed between us, a recognition of the dangerous intimacy that now defined our relationship. I realized, with both dread and thrill, that nothing would ever be the same. Every glance, every fleeting gesture, every silent moment carried weight beyond reason. By mid-afternoon, I found myself in the copy room, organizing documents when I felt the presence behind me. He stepped in, almost silently, and I froze. The air between us was taut, heavy, electric. He leaned slightly toward me, gaze unwavering, and I could feel the faint warmth radiating from him, a proximity that made my pulse race uncontrollably. "Do you feel it?" he asked quietly, almost a whisper, his eyes searching mine. I swallowed hard. Yes, I admitted, voice trembling. The word hung between us, heavy with truth and implication. My chest was tight, every breath shallow. He reached out, fingers brushing my shoulder ever so lightly, a touch that should have been casual but carried a weight, a subtle claim, a spark of intimacy that left me weak. My body betrayed me, leaning slightly into him even as my mind screamed to pull away. "Good," he said softly, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Because from now on, you won't be able to ignore it, or me." The tension between us was almost unbearable, a taut string that threatened to snap at any moment. I wanted to speak, to protest, to rationalize, but the words wouldn't come. I was too aware of him, too aware of the pull, the dangerous closeness, the subtle thrill that made my head spin. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of work and tension. Every glance, every step, every faint smile carried weight. I realized, with a shiver, that I was utterly consumed, not by fear alone, not by logic, but by the complex, dangerous attraction that Armaan inspired in me. And I hated myself for it, yet I couldn't resist it either. As the office emptied for the day, I lingered at my desk, staring at my reflection in the monitor glass. Pale, tense, uncertain, but undeniably drawn to him. The thought of tomorrow, of another day under his watchful gaze, made my chest tighten. Every step, every decision, every heartbeat was now intertwined with him. And deep inside, I understood something terrifying: the blackmail, the contract, the fear, they had all become entwined with desire. Every glance, every touch, every word carried a weight I could no longer ignore. I was ensnared, willingly or not, in a dangerous dance that would define the days to come. The storm outside had long since passed, leaving the city drenched and grey, and I felt the quiet tension of the office mirror the storm inside me. Whatever came next. The office was unusually quiet that Thursday evening, the hum of the air conditioning and distant typing the only sounds breaking the heavy silence. Outside, the last streaks of sunlight painted the city gold, spilling through the tall glass windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. I sat at my desk, hands folded tightly, trying to focus on the reports before me, but every part of me screamed that I wasn't alone. Armaan appeared quietly, as he always did, his presence filling the space even without a word. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me with that same calm, calculating gaze that had haunted my thoughts for days. The office, which had always been my sanctuary of logic and order, now felt like a cage, the walls closing in with the weight of his attention. "Working late?" he asked, voice soft but carrying the kind of authority that made me straighten instantly. "I just wanted to finish this," I murmured, avoiding his gaze. But I knew the truth: I wasn't finishing anything. My mind was consumed by him, the way he moved, the faint warmth of his hand when he had brushed mine, the way his gaze lingered a second too long. The pull between us had grown stronger, impossible to ignore, and terrifyingly intoxicating. He stepped closer, the air between us charged. "You've been thinking about Friday," he said quietly, almost a statement rather than a question. My pulse jumped, and I realized he was right. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every heartbeat, every breath, every fleeting touch over the past week had intertwined with desire and fear, blurring boundaries I wasn't ready to confront. "I don't know what to think," I admitted, voice barely audible. My hands trembled, and I stared down at the papers in front of me, though I saw nothing on them. His gaze softened, a flicker of something human behind the usual cold precision. "That's natural," he said. "This isn't simple, and neither are we." The words hung between us, intimate and dangerous, drawing me in despite every rational thought I had. I wanted to retreat, to reclaim some shred of control, but I couldn't. The office felt smaller, charged, as though every surface, every shadow, every sound was conspiring to force me into proximity with him. He stepped closer, and the faint scent of his cologne wrapped around me, intoxicating, overwhelming. "Do you trust me?" he asked, low and deliberate, the kind of question that made my pulse spike and my chest tighten. "I want to," I whispered. The words were honest, though trembling. Desire and fear waged war inside me, and I had no choice but to surrender to the pull. He tilted his head slightly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Good," he said softly. "Because from now on, trust will be everything between us." The quiet intimacy of the moment was overwhelming. I could feel my heart racing, the warmth spreading through my chest. The office, the reports, the city outside, all faded into insignificance. There was only him, only the magnetic pull between us, charged with danger and curiosity. Then, almost imperceptibly, he reached out, his fingers brushing my wrist. The contact was fleeting, casual in appearance, but it sent a shiver through my body that left me weak and unsteady. My breath caught, my hands tightened around the edge of my desk, and I realized that every instinct screamed to resist, but I couldn't. "I've been watching you," he confessed softly, his voice low, intimate. "Every day. Not just your work, but the way you hesitate, the way you falter, the way you move when you think no one is looking. You intrigue me." The confession hit me like a jolt. My pulse thundered in my ears. Every glance, every brush of hands, every fleeting moment over the past week suddenly made sense, the intensity, the danger, the pull. I felt my knees weaken, my chest tighten, and my lips part in silent, involuntary admission. "I don't understand why I feel this way," I whispered. "I'm terrified of it." "Of you?" He stepped closer, closing the distance, and for the first time, the air between us was impossibly tight. His gaze softened yet remained commanding, anchoring me even as my heart raced. "That's the point," he said quietly. "Fear and desire aren't opposites, they coexist. And right now, we're both standing on the edge of it." My breath hitched, the world narrowing until it was only us, only the charged, fragile space between our bodies. The pull was undeniable, magnetic, dangerous. I wanted to step back, to remind myself that this was a contract, that reason should govern my actions, but my body refused. The warmth of him, the intensity of his gaze, the subtle intimacy of each movement, anchored me in place. "You're dangerous," I whispered, barely audible, my voice trembling. He smirked faintly, leaning just enough closer for me to feel the heat radiating from him. "Not as dangerous as you think," he said. "But yes, I am dangerous for you. That's what makes this interesting." The word interesting should have seemed casual, but it carried weight, threat, and allure all at once. My chest tightened further, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Every fiber of my being screamed with tension, anticipation, and an unbidden thrill. He reached out again, fingers tracing the line of my jaw, hesitant yet deliberate. The touch was electrifying, intimate, and completely impossible to ignore. My lips parted, breath shallow, as I realized just how powerless I was under the pull of him. I began, but my voice failed. Words were inadequate. How could I explain the fear, the desire, the fascination, and the thrill that all collided in my chest? He leaned closer, his face inches from mine, and I could see the faint flicker of something, curiosity, challenge, maybe even vulnerability, in his eyes. "Shh," he whispered, the sound soft, intimate, impossible to resist. "You don't have to say anything. Just feel it." The moment stretched between us, taut and fragile. My heart thundered, my chest ached, and my mind spun with the dangerous realization that whatever this was, it had already begun to consume me. Desire, fear, tension, they had become indistinguishable. And yet, despite the danger, despite the threat to every rational thought, I didn't pull away. For a long, suspended beat, we simply stood there, the office around us fading into insignificance. Every sound, every shadow, every heartbeat was a reminder that this connection, this dangerous, intoxicating tension, was real. And I was powerless to resist it. Finally, he stepped back, just enough to give me space, though the electricity between us lingered. "This isn't the end," he said softly. "It's only the beginning. And if you think this is easy, you're mistaken. Desire doesn't wait for permission, and neither do I." I nodded, voice lost, chest tight. My body still hummed with the aftermath of proximity, the trace warmth of his hands lingering in ways I couldn't explain. The office felt impossibly quiet, every sound magnified, every shadow a reminder of the pull he had on me. As I returned to my desk, I realized with both thrill and terror that the first barrier had been broken. The blackmail, the contract, the fear, they had all become intertwined with desire. Every glance, every word, every fleeting touch would now carry weight beyond reason. And deep down, I knew that nothing, not the office, not the city outside, not even the boundaries of logic, would ever feel ordinary again. The storm had passed outside, leaving the city drenched and quiet, but the storm within me raged on. Desire, fear, and tension coiled together. Thursday evening draped the office in a quiet, golden haze, the sun slipping behind the city skyline. Outside, the lights of skyscrapers began to glitter like scattered jewels, but inside, all I could feel was the weight of him, Armaan. The usual hum of computers and distant typing seemed muted, as if the building itself held its breath. Every corner, every reflection on the polished floors, seemed to echo the tension that had been building all week. I sat at my desk, hands folded tightly, trying to focus on reports that no longer mattered. My chest was tight, my pulse erratic. I could feel him before I even saw him, his presence entering the room, calm yet magnetic, commanding without a word. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to bury myself in work, but my body betrayed me, frozen in anticipation. Armaan appeared by my desk, leaning casually, eyes locking onto mine. The faint smirk at the corner of his lips was unnerving, intoxicating. He was close enough that I could smell the subtle warmth of his cologne, yet he didn't touch me. Not yet. The air between us was taut, electric, every second stretching infinitely. "You've been avoiding me," he said softly, voice low, a whisper that seemed to vibrate through the room. "Pretending this tension doesn't exist. But it has. From the beginning." My throat tightened. "I don't know how to handle it," I admitted, voice trembling. Every word felt heavy, as though the act of saying it aloud made it real. Desire, fear, fascination, they all collided in my chest, impossible to untangle. His gaze softened for a fraction of a second, vulnerability flickering behind his usual controlled intensity. "You don't have to handle it," he said gently. "You just have to feel it. Accept it. Accept it." The words were simple yet devastating. My chest ached. I had been trying to fight, to resist, but the truth was undeniable. The pull between us, dangerous, intoxicating, was inescapable. He stepped closer, the faint heat of his presence brushing against me. I wanted to step back, to assert control, but every part of me leaned forward, drawn to him, helpless against the gravity of his gaze. "Do you trust me?" he asked, low, deliberate, intimate. The question made my breath hitch. I wanted to say yes, to surrender entirely, but words felt fragile against the storm of emotion inside me. "I want to," I whispered, voice trembling. The admission sent a shiver down my spine, both terrifying and exhilarating. He tilted his head, faint smirk lingering. "Good. Because from now on, trust will be everything between us." The office walls, once a symbol of professionalism, now felt like a cage. Every glance, every subtle movement, carried weight. His fingers brushed mine, just enough to ignite sparks through my body. The touch was casual in appearance, intimate in effect. My pulse surged, breath shallow, cheeks warm. My rational mind screamed to resist, but desire had already claimed me. I began, but the words faltered. My chest was too full of emotion, fear, longing, curiosity, all tangled together in ways I had never anticipated. "Sure," he whispered, leaning closer, his forehead nearly touching mine. "You don't need words. Just feel it." The electricity between us intensified, each heartbeat synchronized with the other. The office, the city, the contracts, the blackmail, they all vanished. There was only this, the dangerous, magnetic tension that had been building for days. "I'm scared," I admitted, almost inaudibly. "Of this, of you, of everything." His fingers traced the line of my jaw, gentle, deliberate, claiming without aggression. "Fear isn't weakness," he murmured. "It's proof that this matters. That you and I are alive in this moment. That we're real." The intimacy of his words left me breathless. Desire, fascination, fear, they all coiled inside me, impossible to separate. I realized I had been trying to fight what was inevitable. The blackmail, the contract, even the initial humiliation, it had all led to this storm of emotion, and now I could no longer resist. He closed the distance, face inches from mine, eyes searching mine for truth. "Do you want this?" he asked, soft yet deliberate. "I don't know," I whispered, voice trembling. "I think I do." The words barely formed, but they carried the weight of my surrender. His smirk widened slightly. "Good," he breathed. "Because I want this too. More than anything." Time seemed to suspend. The city outside darkened, the office emptying around us, yet nothing existed except the two of us. My body hummed with anticipation and tension, every nerve alive. He reached out and held my hand firmly, grounding me, claiming me. The warmth of his touch spread like fire, and I realized with a shiver how powerless I had become. Desire, fascination, fear, all inseparable, all overwhelming. "I've been waiting for this," he admitted softly. "Every glance, every moment this week, it led to now. And I won't let it pass without acknowledgement." I swallowed hard. Every action, every subtle touch, every fleeting glance over the past week had been a slow build-up to this confession. And now, standing here with him, I understood the truth. I was utterly ensnared. I felt my lips part instinctively. "Armaan." He silenced me with a gentle, deliberate touch, his fingers brushing my lips. "Don't speak," he whispered. "Just feel. Words will come later." The tension between us was electric, unbearable, intoxicating. I realized I had crossed a line I could never uncross. Yet for the first time, I didn't want to. The danger, the pull, the forbidden desire, it had claimed me entirely. He leaned closer, forehead brushing mine, eyes locked on mine with quiet intensity. "This is ours," he murmured. "No one else, no one watching, no rules. Just this moment." I closed my eyes, chest tight, pulse racing. Everything, the contract, the blackmail, the office, the city outside, faded. There was only him, only us, only the storm that now defined every heartbeat. Minutes, or perhaps hours, passed in suspended silence. Every breath, every heartbeat, every subtle shift in proximity was magnified by the intensity of the moment. The blackmail and contract had been the catalyst, but now it was something more: desire, fascination, and a dangerous intimacy that could no longer be denied. Finally, he stepped back slightly, just enough to let me breathe, yet his eyes never left mine. "We've crossed a line," he said softly, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "And there's no turning back." I nodded, unable to speak. "I know," I whispered, voice trembling. The truth was terrifying and exhilarating. "Good," he murmured. "Because whatever comes next, we face it together. I won't let anything threaten you or us." The city lights glittered outside, the office quiet, reflective, but inside, the storm raged on. Desire, intimacy, fear, they were now intertwined, impossible to separate. I shivered, knowing that the next glance, the next brush of hands, the next word between us, could change everything, or cement this connection irrevocably. And deep down, I understood that nothing would ever be ordinary again. Not the office, not the contract, not even my own heart. From this moment on, we were bound, not just by law or circumstance, but by something far more dangerous, far more consuming, the storm of desire, intimacy, and forbidden emotion that now defined every moment we shared.